Esenberg from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is standing by on the Homesteader Store hotline. Homesteader Store, good people with the right stuff, Kubota, Ellis Tractor, and Cub Cadet. I've got two things to talk with you about. Rick, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. First, and I talked a bit about this in the first hour, and that was the Elias Legal Group filing a suit in Wisconsin to make absentee ballot drop boxes and a removal of the requirement to have a witness signature on absentee ballots in Wisconsin a right, basically a constitutional right. They're arguing before our court that ballot drop boxes are a right, and forcing someone to get a witness signature on an absentee ballot is somehow an infringement of voting rights. Let's start there. And then I want to talk about this insane stuff about these so-called fake electors.
Yeah, so they're relying on a provision in the Wisconsin Constitution that says there's a fundamental right to vote, and it does say that. But what it doesn't say is that there's a fundamental right to vote in a particular way or to vote absentee. And the problem that the Elias Group has is they're going to have to go into court and they're going to have to say that in a state that existed for 170 years, a good chunk of that time either didn't permit absentee voting or permitted it only if you had an excuse. And it wasn't until the late 1980s, mid to late 1980s, that we started to move towards this system that said you could vote absentee whenever you wanted to. Before that, you had to prove that you were actually unavailable to vote in person on Election Day. That somehow this has turned into a violation of the Constitution, and that is a weak argument by almost any standard I'm aware of for evaluating constitutional claims like that. Now, they may think that, well, the composition of the court has changed, so, they can win whatever foolish argument that they throw out there. I hope that proves not to be the case.
Could it be, is this one of those cases that does not go beyond the Wisconsin Supreme Court? Or is it a case that may be able to make its way potentially to the Supreme Court of the United States?
Probably not to the Supreme Court of the United States,
okay.
Because whether or not the statutes require or permit drop boxes, and whether or not the state constitution requires or doesn't require something is not a matter for the U.S. Supreme Court unless the Wisconsin Supreme Court has done something that it can be claimed violates the federal Constitution, and at least initially, I don't see that argument yet.
Well, okay. I think they are looking at the composition of the court, and they're eyeing it with some enthusiasm. So remains to be seen. I hope you're right. And I hope, these people who have been elected to the Supreme Court, now in the majority, the liberals, are not so cynical and partisan that they would just try to twist themselves in a way that would, reimagine the law in ways nobody ever intended. Then again, I'm looking at the Dane County judge on the abortion question who said, oh, that law that's under the heading abortion, it's not really about abortion. That's about feticide. So that makes me think maybe, Rick, they're not shooting too far off mark if they think they're going to be able to take their chances with a court that's now maybe favorable to them.
I am not, when I said what I said, I was expressing a hope, not
Hopeful.
a prediction.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about this fake elector thing, because it's not really, they're not fake electors. They're alternative electors, or maybe contingent electors. But how, in Arizona, I believe Georgia and Michigan, Michigan for sure, because the AG has already gone forward on this, but also in Arizona and Georgia, there may be, little old ladies and little old men who are going to be brought under criminal indictment for standing as an alternative slate of electors under the, long shot that Trump would have been successful in a recount. But we've got precedent on this. How is this being considered criminal?
I mean, I don't think it can be. And look, let's put something to the side. This doesn't have anything to do as to whether or not you think Trump really won or anything like that. What remember, we have to put ourselves back to December 14th, 2020. And there were a variety of legal challenges that were going on. Now, I think by December 14th, it was pretty clear that those challenges were not going to be successful. But, lawyers will often advise people that, if you've got a challenge going, if you're fighting something in court, sometimes you may have to take certain steps to preserve your claim. So in the event that you win, you will be able to get the relief that you want, in this case, having their votes counted in the Republican column. And so what they did was they cast an alternate slate of votes for Donald Trump. But this idea that this was fake or fraudulent seems to me to be contrived. This is not a situation like what would occur if, somebody goes to the bank and they pretend to be Vicky McKenna and they clear out your checking account, right? They've fooled somebody. There was no way that these people were going to fool anybody. Everybody knew Governor Evers had certified, Biden is the winner and that the official count was the official count. The only way those votes were ever going to be counted was that if the final decision maker, in this case that would have been the United States Supreme Court, had ultimately determined that Donald Trump had really won Wisconsin. And in that case, nothing they did could be considered fraudulent or wrongful. They would have, the claim that they were seeking to preserve would have turned out to be successful. And the fact that that didn't happen, the fact that that was unlikely to happen, might make what they did futile, but it doesn't make it fraudulent because the only way it ever could have worked was if the final decision maker would have decided that Trump won.
Yeah, it was just in case, we get before the Supreme Court and, it goes our way. We have preserved the ability to have our electors select Trump. But in the event it doesn't go our way, highly likely, no big deal, right? They actually did this in Hawaii, as I understand, and this was back when Nixon was running, but they preserved the rights in the claim by selecting an alternate slate of electors. Nobody thought it was criminal. Maybe they thought it was silly, but nobody thought it was criminal. So now what you've got, which is why I'm worried about the other issues we just talked about, you have got lawyers and presumably judges who are willing to sort of recast just the plain meaning of the law and recast attorney's advice as somehow akin to a criminal conspiracy. It's weird and it's scary.
Yeah, I think it's just another example of criminalizing, political differences. It's quite all right to say that, what the electors did was futile, it was a waste of time, it was dumb, say whatever you want. But it's quite another thing to say that it's criminal, that it's something that people can be sent to jail for.
And that's what they're trying to do to a bunch of little old ladies and little old men.
Yeah, exactly. And your point about the age is correct. I think in Michigan, there are 3 of the electors that are 55, and I think the rest of them are over 60, and a lot of them are in their 70s.
I think the rest of them are almost all of them are over 70. So you want to take people. This is another thing that has gotten very little attention. People are like, "Yeah, go get them." For what? There was no intention to violate any law. None of these people could ever be. So you actually made this point on Twitter. Where's the criminal intent here? There's no criminal intent whatsoever. Never mind that it makes perfectly logical sense if you're trying to protect your claim. Never mind Nixon's, in the Nixon race, this happened. And all of these people are out for blood wanting to ruin the retirements of these senior citizens. They also want the lawyers. They're going after the lawyers. Dragging John Eastman out in California for a disbarment. They're going after all the Trump lawyers for advising their client. However they advise their client, they want to put these people in the poorhouse or put them in prison, Rick.
Yeah, one of the things that I have to confess that I know some of these lawyers. I know John Eastman. I know Ken Chesbrough. I know Jim Trupis really well, and anybody who tells me that he's not an excellent and highly ethical lawyer, I they're absolutely wrong. He's both of those things. But, I always say to myself, it's not a crime to make a bad legal argument. And thank God it's not, because there would be a lot of lawyers who would be standing in the dock right now, because it's pretty hard never to make a bad one.
Well, here's the thing. I think what it's trying to do is send a message to anybody else. Don't you even think about defending conservative positions or Trump or whatever that is. And I mean, let's roll back to 2020 when the Trump campaign was looking for lawyers. None of the big law firms wanted to send him lawyers. Nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So how do you get legal representation if you've basically got people threatening to put the lawyers in jail?
Right. And, as I said, I mean, our system doesn't work unless, you can get lawyers on both sides to get into court and they can argue. And I make no secret of the fact. I mean, I am not impressed by the arguments that Trump really won Wisconsin. I don't think that happened. But I also don't think that, people who disagreed with me about that and may have not come to that conclusion or come to that conclusion later than I did, deserve to be put into jail for it or deserve to have their law licenses pulled. I mean, this is raising the stakes of politics in a way that we don't want to raise it. It really, here locally, it started with the caucus scandal. It continued with the John Doe. And it's not something that people on either side should want because, again, I've said this, I think I've said this on your show again and again and again. Someday there will be a person in power that don't like, and I don't think they want this to become the new set of rules for the game that you set out to destroy and imprison your political opponent.
Yeah, I don't think we want to revisit, Stalin's tactics, but some people do. I just don't think a lot of people understand what the implication is going to be for that. Rick Esenberg, a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, take care.
Good to have you. Rick Esenberg, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, will-law.org is their website.